Hello, I want to welcome you to the Diverse Jewish Books podcast, where our goal is to uplift diverse experiences in Jewish Kidlit. Today, I am very excited to welcome author of the new book, The See You Soon Spice Box, and author of our fan favorite, Queen of the Hanukkah Dosas. Hi, Pamela.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about you and what being Jewish looks like to you?
Sure, absolutely. I'm really glad to be here. In terms of being Jewish, it has really always been for me a lot about connections, building connections and feeling connected. I grew up as an only child just outside of Baltimore, and I always had this feeling of wanting to connect to the wider world out there. I really found being Jewish as a way to connect across time to my parents' childhood stories of their growing up, to my grandparents, and then through our Jewish texts that we share, just connecting all the way back through history and connecting across time into some kind of imagined future, as well as I think connecting across space, just getting to meet kids who were growing up in different places from me and had some shared experiences and some different experiences. But I think being Jewish has always been a lot about that for me as an adult. So I live in Washington, D.C., just near the National Zoo. I say I live with my two teenagers, although one is away at college much of the time now, but my kids are 16 and 19. And I think as an adult, being Jewish has really kind of continued echoing that theme of connection. That we were lucky when my kids were little to find a really wonderful Touch Shabbat service in the basement of our synagogue, where the feeling was very much about people building connections both with each other, with the traditions in ways that made sense for each family, each person. And it wasn't a feeling of other people already having the playbook and knowing knowing the rules and me trying to figure it out as we went, but just really building those connections together.
That sounds like an incredibly welcoming community.
It is. So shout out to Honest Israel if folks are watching and listening. So we appreciate that.
I'm excited to talk to you about your new book, and we're going to spend the majority of our time on that. But if we can start with a book of yours, which we've actually already featured on the Diverse Jewish Books Instagram page, Queen of the Hanukkah Dosas. Can you tell us what the book is about?
On one level, it's about a family that is trying to make a dosa recipe that they enjoy making at Hanukkah. And the youngest member of their family is a toddler who is constantly climbing and disrupting and getting in everyone's way and causing a lot of mess. And it's from the perspective of the older sibling who finds her annoying for much of the story, but ultimately, yeah, her climbing is what saves the day there.
And what was your inspiration behind the book?
I was watching my own kids with a similar age difference around that time, and there was a lot of climbing and a lot of rearranging our lives so that things could happen. On the one hand, there was a piece of the inspiration that actually came from when I was 2. I had locked our family out of the house by accident by closing the door behind us, and our neighbor, who was a little older than me, was commissioned to climb in and go and unlock the door for everyone. So that was the one piece that was true from from actual experience, and the one piece that showed up in somebody's Goodreads review as well. I really like this book, but that part was just totally not believable. And I'm thinking, yeah, but that's the one part that, so I always enjoy that. But, and then I think, the other piece of the inspiration really came from this wonderful Touch Shabbat service where we were going every week and where I was really seeing a much wider array of diverse Jewish experiences than what I had really encountered in a lot of other Jewish settings up until that point. And so I was realizing that was reflected in my community and what I was experiencing each week, but it was at the time not as reflected in as many of the books that I was seeing. And so I think we experimented. Doses are hard to make. I found it takes a real lot of expertise in experimenting and trying with some of those foods. I think there was a spark of inspiration of, oh, this had some aspect of eating foods cooked in oil at Hanukkah time. And so there was a spark of inspiration of whether to bring some of those ideas together.
That's amazing. And I didn't think about the fact that this book is a good lesson in childproofing, too. One question I have, and this is going to be actually a little bit of a controversial question. Something that's fairly common now in the writing community, but probably wasn't talked about as much then, is this idea, and we don't use the terminology anymore, but the idea of own voices.
Mhm.
Talk to me about the kind of research that you did so that you felt comfortable writing this story from an experience that you observed, that not necessarily that you lived.
Absolutely. So I definitely shared early drafts of the manuscript with lots of people that I knew, where this, the family in the story was closer to their own family's experience, and got a lot of feedback that way. And I was really thrilled when the illustrator that was selected, Anjan Sarkar, he was from a background that is Indian and not Jewish. So I was from a background of Jewish and not Indian. And so being able to really think about the book inter the words and the pictures together make the book. And so I think getting to have those parts kind of play off of each other, it was not the same as either one of us having exactly experienced what was in the book, but we each brought some pieces and had it work together to hopefully get um, yeah.
And it is such a beautiful story. What is one reader's response that has really stuck with you over time?
I think the one that I come back to, and I've heard versions of this from different people, but there was one in person conversation at a JCC event soon after the book came out, where somebody just came up to me afterwards and just said how much it meant to her that she had never seen a family like hers in a book before. And that really took me to a level. I knew I was writing from a place of this is something we need to see more of in books, but to hear from someone who the family the book was reflective of her family's experience, and that she had never found something to share with her kids that reflected it that way, that really stuck with me and made me feel like for all its imperfections, I think all of us writing, the goal was never to have the pinnacle experience of this is going to be the book that defines everything but to hear from one person that it was the first time that she had been able to share that with her kids really really meant
And it hasn't been, I don't want to say replicated because there's no like singular experience that is replicable,
a lot. Right.
but there aren't many other picture books that do capture that same experience still.
Mhm.
Okay, so the fact that that's the kind of reader response that stuck with you, this ability to enable other people to see their families in writing. I think you do a little bit of that with the See You Soon Spice Box too. So I'd love to be able to shift over to that, talk about the See You Soon Spice Box, which we're excited about coming out the first week in March. And it is such a beautiful intergenerational story and also some more unique elements to it. Can you talk about what the See You Soon Spice Box is about?
It is about a child who makes Havdalah with his great grandma over Zoom or over an unnamed video platform, I guess, that may look familiar to some, but they use technology to stay connected, even though they're physically far away. And they get to share kind of this in between moment of Havdalah and get to experience that the child gets to make his own spice box inspired by one that his great grandma shares that his great grandfather, who he presumably hasn't met, has shared with her.
What was your inspiration for writing the See You Soon Spice Box?
You know, I think that was one that I had worked on various iterations of for a while. I really there was something about I love Havdalah, and there was something about it being a way of saying see you soon, that Shabbat is coming back, that it's we might be sad in the moment that Shabbat is ending, but that this can be a form of goodbye of a we know that we're still connected and that we'll we'll come back to that. So I had tried different variations, and I think really over the pandemic, both the idea of disruption of all of our daily routines, it it came to feel even more important at that time to have something, the fact that Shabbat was going to come back, and here's our Havdalah ceremony that reminds us of that, so that with everything kind of awry in the world, that we can feel assured of having that kind of routine. And I think the video connections, it was a time maybe technology caught up in some ways. We were living far away in a lot of cases from people who were dear to us even before the pandemic, but at that point, the technology made it easier and more intuitive in some ways to stay connected. So I think, my wonderful in-laws, my late husband's parents, were a regular video, still are regular video callers with us, which is wonderful. And the book is actually dedicated for our connection at the beginning there, which is wonderful. And also my aunt, my children's great aunt at the time, she has since passed away, but we really enjoyed the video connections where the kids would make little emoji stickers and things and put over her face and all that. And it was just a nice way that even if we weren't physically together, to stay connected that way.
And that ties back in really nicely, I think, too, to how you were describing, if you remember, how we started this conversation when you were talking about what being Jewish looks like to you.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that it's sort of a way to connect across time
Mm-hmm.
and place.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that really nicely in this book. There's a couple across time connection points in the
Mm-hmm.
See You Soon Spice Box. Can you talk a little bit in more detail about them?
One that comes to mind for me, I think, has to do with the great grandfather who is not living at the time of the story. And I think it's something where sometimes in kids' books in particular, I think there's questions come up of how much to put in a book, how to help kids to feel connected with family members who maybe they've met, maybe they haven't met, but are not here with us physically, but yet are still connected with us, as you say. And so I think that was an aspect, in this case, it was through this particular object that he had made the spice box himself. And now the great grandma was able to share it in this way, with the other generations of the family. And I guess, so that's kind of big picture, maybe connecting across time. I guess the idea of the weekly cadence of Shabbat and Havdalah, I think, is a time kind of piece too, that we mark time that way, and time, and there's different times for different things. And the main character Silas, I think he mentions at one point that he's older right now than he was last year in the moonbeam class. I have to say was a favorite for both of my kids as well. He's older than he was last year in the moonbeam class, and now but younger than he's going to be next year. And so kids have this sense of we're always in between a couple different points in time that way.
What was your experience like writing this book, especially going through this during the pandemic?
It meant a lot, I think, when I was able to. I had, and I imagine you as a writer too probably have various versions of different things, and it projects that you may be working on, and it's hard to know which ones are actually going to gel into something that can resonate with a reader in a in the form of a book. So I think this was a case where possibly the pandemic helped to solidify. I mean, I had started working on it before then, and I had played with different versions. The idea of the craft project. I like the idea of the eventual reader out there is going to have this way of interacting with the story by creating their own thing. So there was an early version that focused primarily on that as the activity in the action, I guess, in the book. There was another version where the idea of see you soon came up with a child who was hesitant to say goodbye at preschool drop off. And so the idea of see you soon isn't really goodbye. It's a goodbye for this moment, but with the promise of what's coming next. So there were kind of some different versions of that. And I guess in this case, the pandemic, maybe getting to experience for myself too, the idea of everything in the world is out of whack. I don't know quite what I can count on and what is happening next. And so getting to experience, feeling that at the same time the character was feeling that, maybe kind of helped to put some of those puzzle pieces together in the way that it currently landed, I guess. But possibly any of those other ones could have gelled maybe in some other some other universe, some other form.
Maybe you're sharing some ideas here that you're going to put into future picture books.
We'll see. Or I'd welcome any of your listeners who want to write about Havdalah. I feel like Havdalah is a whole rich ground, and we need more Havdalah books too. So
I agree with that. There's some really unique and really special elements about this book. You already mentioned that the great grandfather is not present in the story, but there's other elements of the story that you can really see through the images and the illustrations here that I would love for you to spend a little bit more time talking about, if you don't mind.
sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and it's always so interesting to hear like what resonates and what rises to the surface as a unique element. So I know in our early conversations, what from the See You Soon Spice Box fits, under the diverse Jewish books, characterization in particular. And it was really important to me actually that this was a single parent family. It's a single dad in the book, and I don't know that how it would have necessarily played out differently as a single mom. I think that's something to think about. But I think having having it clear that this is a joyful family with a lot of extended family connections. So there's the regular check-ins with the great grandma. The main character has an older brother, so it's the two of them living with their dad. And there's a mention of an aunt who's involved. She's not part of this Havdalah story in particular, but she gets mentioned. And I think maybe similar to Queen of the Hanukkah Dosas, the idea that this is a joyful story about some aspect of Jewish celebration, and that we're getting to see this take place in a family that is a single parent family. My hope is that someday that's not going to feel unique and revolutionary or whatever it may be. But I actually was having a conversation with somebody just this week who's starting a support, I don't know, a support group, but like a social group or something for single parents of young children. And she said, in her email, oh, this is amazing that there's a Jewish picture book featuring a single dad. And it was a little bit of an echo I was feeling with that earlier conversation from the JCC of, wow, like just a Jewish, but not just a Havdalah book or but it's just that they're really, I think we can use more joyful stories, featuring all kinds of families. And I think the other piece that I think you and I had talked about in terms of, does this count as diverse in the sense, but the fact that the family lives in, whether it's an apartment or a condo, it's some sort of high rise building where they have, I think I forget if it's 12B or 12C, they have a neighbor on each side. And so one of the in between aspects that Silas, the main character, refers to is, their family space of being physically in between, they're two different neighbors on each side. And, we live in DC in a condo building. And so I think, that's something that's part of our experience, but also, that we notice, I know when my kids were little, the sukkah on the roof came up as, oh, it's a family that is figuring out how to build a sukkah, in their apartment building. And I know my DC friend Erica Pearl has a Hanukkah book that takes place in an apartment building as well. But the fact that, I can kind of go through my mind and think about how many Jewish picture books there are where the main character lives in something other than a single family house. I know they're out there. I'm sure I haven't mentioned all of them, and it is off the top of my mind. But I think we need more just to reflect, just like you said, so that every kid can see themselves, and also that kids who may live in a single family house don't necessarily need to have that as the cookie cutter model of what their life needs to look like at every stage. I grew up in a standalone house. Now, living in a condo as an adult, I think just the idea that everyone can see themselves, can imagine all different kinds of futures, and not be boxed into an idea of what looking Jewish necessarily has to look like.
It's a really important window into that experience for kids who might not experience it or see it otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What? So we know the book's not out yet. We're excited for it coming out. When it's out, what is it that you hope? What is it that you hope that readers walk away from this book with? Whether it's a feeling or a learning, what is it you hope they take away?
I hope they come away with a lot of joy. And I think like with any good book, that I think any good book that I've read, the idea that you might want to come back to it and experience different things from it at different times. So I think, the there can be hopefully some joy sparked about Havdalah, some joy, in getting the hands-on experience of creating their own spice box might be fun for some. I think that I'm I'm hoping for intergenerational connections. I'm looking forward to hopefully doing some online opportunities later this year for really encouraging young kids and family members or special friends or folks who live far away, that I think in the busyness of life, we sometimes intend to reach out more often than we might actually make that happen. And so maybe to spark some intergenerational connecting through, but then also beyond the book. And I think then also, some of these windows and mirrors and just getting to experience how the family in this book experiences joy can hopefully help readers feel good about their own joy and looking for joyful connections with others.
I want to put a finer point on two things we've talked about. One, can you summarize for me why it's so important to share these Jewish traditions through stories with our children?
Great. I think, as a writer, I'm sure I have my own biases as, how else would we do it? How would we do it without stories? I think stories do help us to keep those connections in a way that we feel something different inside when we're part of a story or when we get led into somebody else's story. And I think that gives us and then future generations maybe something to hold on to at times when world is always going to be uncertain in some way or another for somebody that we're in our world. And I think being able to feel a connection through a story is more powerful at times than just being told a connection exists that we might not know how to grasp onto or how to connect with in that moment maybe.
That's sort of like the beautiful tactile element here of like making your own spice box or making some
Mhm.
food that you can fry in oil for Hanukkah, right? It's that like physical connection too.
That's so true, right? Because I think story doesn't have to necessarily be limited to words. I think knowing that part of the readership for picture books is kids who are not actually yet reading themselves. I think hearing the words is a part of it, but I think everything that you said, all those other ways of connecting with story, that's all very much story as well.
And then the other thing you talked about here, but I want to bring it home sort of as we conclude our conversation. For you, why is it important to include these different types of diverse experiences in your writing?
I think there's a lot about, tying your two questions together. I think there's a lot about what stories were told as children and what stories were not told, that because there is this powerful connection with story, I think it can be the stories that we are told as children, I think find their way into who we are in ways that, you know, as we're adults, we can catch up. I think all of us who are listening and watching who maybe didn't have this this exposure as children, it's not that we're lost to this world, but I think the earlier that we can help to connect children and generations across time with stories of people within our own or other times, but to really an array of experiences, I think shapes people's outlook. And going forward, I think the children who are reading and being read to picture books today are going to be leading our country and our world in a very short amount of time. When I think back to the age that my kids were when I was writing queen of the Hanukkah Dosas, even to the age that my kids are now, it happens quickly. And so, what opportunities do we have as adults in this moment to, you know, put put the mix of stories in there so that we can't control what is going to happen in the future, but we can make sure that stories are a tool that help help our future leaders be as best equipped as possible, I guess.
That is really inspiring to think about the impact that words might have for kids. Thank you for that. The last question I have for you: what is the best way for readers to follow along with your work?
Sure. Well, I am newly on Instagram. So, with shout out to my 16 and 19-year-old who made sure that it's all good. So, that is Pamela Ehrenberg, author. And I even figured out on my own how to make sure that my Instagram author posts are also linked to my Facebook author account, because I do think intergenerationally, it's interesting even within the author world. I feel like that sort of in betweenness experience. I really appreciate and value being able to connect with the kidlit community, people who have been writing these stories for decades and people who are working on their very first stories, which doesn't always correlate with what age or social media anybody is. But I really appreciate having having that foot in both worlds. So I believe that's Pamela Ehrenberg, author, as well. And so folks who are on Facebook can find the same posts that are going onto my Instagram, Pamela Ehrenberg, author account.
Amazing. Thank you. And we look forward to reading the See You Soon Spice Box as soon as it is out in a couple weeks.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everything you do to really help these stories and all stories. It just folks to find joy, and it really makes a difference. So I appreciate you and you're having me here.
We're just bringing diverse Jewish joy into the world here. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you.